The silver bell rang once, and every face in the servants' hall lost its smile. Nia Carter had been inside the Valenti estate for less than 11 minutes. Already, she understood that silence here was not peace. It was policy. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bellini, slid a ring of brass keys across the walnut table. Fluorescent light hummed overhead, glinting against the starch-white cuffs of Nia's new uniform. "East wing, laundry, pantry," she said. Then she held back one narrow black key. "The upstairs nursery remains locked." Somewhere beyond the wall, an antique clock struck 7. No one moved until its final note died. Nia glanced toward the ceiling. "No children live here?" A spoon slipped from a kitchen maid's fingers and struck the tile with a sharp metallic crack. Mrs. Bellini's mouth tightened. "Not for 9 years." She lowered her voice. "There are words we do not use in this house. Celebration. Birthday. Laughter." Nia studied the bowed heads around the table. She had taken the position because steady work meant keeping her apartment and sending money to her mother. Losing it would close both doors. Still, she did not lower her eyes. What happens if somebody forgets? Mr. Valenti never does. At 8, Nia carried the first dinner tray into a dining room built for 24 and occupied by one man. Candlelight shivered across black marble. The air smelled of beeswax, roasted rosemary, and the faint smoke clinging to Vittorio Valenti's charcoal suit. 2 armed guards waited beyond the carved doors, motionless as statues. Vittorio sat at the head of the table beneath a crystal chandelier, cutting untouched veal into exact, narrow strips. His reputation had reached Nia long before his face had: businesses that changed hands after midnight, judges who stopped returning calls, men who whispered his name as if walls could report them. Yet the man before her did not resemble someone enjoying power. He wore it like chains hidden beneath tailored wool. Nia placed his plate down. The porcelain touched the table without a sound. Vittorio's gaze lifted to her name badge, then to her face. Most employees looked away immediately. Nia waited for an instruction. "You're new," he said. His voice was low and polished, cold enough to flatten the room. "Yes, sir." "Then learn quickly." He returned to his meal. No threat followed. None was needed. During the next course, a young footman accidentally brushed a serving spoon against a glass. The bright little chime lasted half a second. Vittorio's hands stopped. Around him, shoulders locked, breathing vanished. He did not shout. He merely looked toward the empty chair at his right, its place setting perfectly arranged though no one sat there. Then he pushed his plate away. "Remove it." As Nia cleared the table, she noticed what the others had trained themselves not to see. Vittorio had set no wine for himself. He ate no dessert. He refused the warmth of the fireplace even as cold pressed through the tall windows. And beneath his right palm, driven into the skin by deliberate pressure, was the deep red imprint of a small silver locket. This was not a king demanding obedience. It was a prisoner guarding his own cell. On her way back to the kitchen, Nia passed the dark staircase to the east wing. At its top stood a white door beneath a layer of dust, secured by the narrow black key Mrs. Bellini had withheld. From the dining room came the scrape of Vittorio's chair, followed by the sound of a glass tightening inside his hand. Nia looked back. For the first time, she wondered not what he might do to anyone who broke the silence, but what he had been doing to himself for 9 years. Crystal struck mahogany with a crack sharp enough to stop every clock in the room. The broken stem rolled across the dining table, flashing beneath the chandelier, while dark wine spread over the white linen like a widening bruise. Nia had just reached the doorway when Vittorio rose from his chair. In his right hand remained the bowl of the shattered glass, its jagged rim pressed into his palm. Mrs. Bellini went pale. That belonged to Mrs. Valenti. The young footman backed into a sideboard, making the silverware tremble. One by one, the servants fled without being dismissed. Their shoes whispered across the marble, then vanished behind the swinging door. Nia stayed. Vittorio opened his fingers. A bright line of blood crossed his palm, but his face remained still, carved by the cold blue light coming through the windows. "Leave," he said. Nia walked toward him instead. The room smelled of spilled wine, extinguished candles, and the metallic edge of blood. "You were given an order. And you need a bandage." His gaze hardened. Men carrying guns had lowered their eyes under that look. Nia did not. She took a folded linen napkin from the service cart and crouched beside the fallen shards. "Don't touch that." "Then stop holding it." For one suspended second, only the fireplace answered, wood settling with a dry hiss. Vittorio released the broken bowl. It landed among the fragments with a brittle chime. Nia gathered the pieces onto a silver tray, careful not to scrape the polished floor. When she stood, Vittorio had closed his injured hand. Blood slipped between his fingers and dotted his cuff. She reached for his wrist. He caught hers first. His grip was controlled, not crushing, but it carried the warning of a locked gate. People in this house survive by knowing when to step away. Maybe that is why no one stays when you're bleeding. His thumb shifted against her pulse. Nia could feel the warmth of his hand and the chill beneath it, as though he had been standing outdoors in winter. The job paid more than anything she could find nearby. Losing it would mean overdue rent and an empty refrigerator. Still, she did not lower her eyes. "Let go," she said quietly, "or bleed on the floor. But choose." Vittorio released her. The balance in the room changed with that small movement. Nia wrapped the napkin firmly around his palm, knotting it beneath his thumb. The linen darkened at once. As she worked, the silver locket slid from his other hand and struck the table. He covered it before she could see the portrait inside. Nia tightened the bandage just enough to make him flinch. "Pain does not become noble just because you carry it alone." The words entered the silence without permission. Vittorio's eyes lifted to her face, not past her uniform, not toward the door, but directly into the steady brown eyes of the woman holding his wounded hand. 9 years of obedience had taught everyone else how to disappear around him. Nia Carter had done the opposite. She had stepped closer, risked her livelihood, and spoken as if the man beneath the power were still accountable for what he did to himself. His mouth did not soften. No laughter came. But something colder than anger broke, his certainty that no one would ever dare reach him. "Why didn't you leave with the others?" he asked. Nia set his bandaged hand on the table and lifted the tray of broken crystal. "Because they were afraid of what you might do." Her eyes remained level. "I was watching what you had already done." She turned toward the service door. Behind her, Vittorio spoke her name for the first time. "Nia." She stopped. His voice had lost its blade, but not its weight. "Tomorrow, you serve dinner beside my chair." It was neither gratitude nor punishment. It was an order to stand closer than anyone in the house had been permitted to stand, and neither of them yet knew which one of them it placed in greater danger. Warm sugar and vanilla drifted through the servants' corridor just before dusk, too sweet for a house where dessert was returned untouched. A copper bowl scraped against stone, followed by the soft slam of a pantry door. Nia found Sophia, the cook's daughter, crouched behind sacks of flour with a small frosted cake pressed against her chest. Pink icing had smeared across the girl's sleeve. 9 uneven candles lay scattered at her feet. "It's Mama's birthday," Sophia whispered. "I saved for the ingredients." "Mrs. Bellini said it has to go." Through the half-open door, Nia saw Mrs. Bellini standing rigid beneath the kitchen's yellow lamps. The housekeeper's keys trembled faintly against her black skirt. "Mr. Valenti forbids celebrations," she said. "Throw it out before dinner." Nia looked at the careful sugar roses, then at the wastebin beside the cold iron stove. The rule answered one question the locked nursery had raised. Whatever happened 9 years ago, Vittorio had not merely sealed away one room. He had outlawed every reminder that life continued beyond it. Nia lifted the cake from Sophia's arms. "Go help your mother with the soup." Sophia swallowed. "What are you going to do?" "Make sure your kindness isn't treated like contraband." At 7, Vittorio entered the great hall expecting the same disciplined stillness. Rain tapped the tall windows. Silver candlesticks cast narrow blades of light across the marble floor, and the fireplace smelled of cedar without warming the room. Nia stood beside his chair as ordered, her dark uniform immaculate. Yet the dining table remained bare. His gaze moved from the empty place setting to Mrs. Bellini, then settled on Nia. "Where is dinner?" "Waiting." Nia crossed to the service doors and opened them herself. A wheeled cart rolled over the marble, its squeaking axle loud enough to make the young footman stiffen. At its center sat Sophia's cake. No soup. No crystal. No silver domes. Just pink frosting beneath the chandelier's white fire. Mrs. Bellini caught Nia's wrist. "Don't." Nia gently freed herself. This was no private act of mercy performed after everyone else had fled. Every servant lined the walls. Every eye could carry the story beyond the room. She was placing her wages, her room, and Sophia's small act of love on the same polished table. Vittorio did not move. "Remove it." Nia struck a match against the box. Sulfur sharpened the vanilla-scented air. The flame quivered between her fingers as she touched it to one candle, not 9, only one, and set the cake in the exact center of the hall. "Whose birthday?" Vittorio asked. "A woman who works under your roof," Nia replied. "And whose daughter believed loving her should not be punished." Sophia's mother covered her mouth near the kitchen door. The young footman stared at the floor. Mrs. Bellini's keys had gone silent. Vittorio approached until the candlelight caught the edge of his silver locket. His bandaged hand rested at his side, a white reminder of the woman who had refused to leave him alone with broken glass. "You were told the rule." "I understood it." "Then you understood the consequence." "Yes." Nia's eyes stayed level while the tiny flame burned between them. Vittorio's shadow swallowed the cake, but not the candle. "Put it out," he said, each word measured. Nia stepped away from the table instead. "No, Mr. Valenti." Around them, the estate seemed to draw one breath and hold it. For 9 years, no one had openly defied the law that kept joy outside those doors. Now a single flame stood in the heart of the house, and Vittorio had to choose whether to extinguish it himself. V spiral muscle fap. The clock above the marble fireplace struck 8, each bronze note rolling through the great hall like a sentence being handed down. Candle wax warmed the air with a trace of honey, while rain tapped against the tall windows and the forbidden flame shivered between Vittorio and Nia. "You're dismissed," Vittorio said. His voice was controlled, but the bandage around his palm tightened as his fingers curled. No one moved. Mrs. Bellini stood rigid beside the dining table, her keys pressed into her skirt. The young footman stared at the black and white tiles. Near the kitchen door, Sophia clung to her mother's sleeve, leaving flour on the dark fabric. Vittorio turned so the entire household could see his face. "Effective immediately. No wages beyond tonight. No room on this estate. Mrs. Bellini will escort you out." The order stripped away more than a job. Nia's lodging, meals, and security disappeared with it. Still, she neither pleaded nor lowered her eyes. She reached behind her waist, untied the white apron, and folded it slowly along its worn seams. The cloth made a soft whisper in the silence. "Mr. Valenti," Sophia's mother began, her voice catching. Vittorio looked toward the kitchen. Sophia flinched. "Who made the cake?" he asked. Nia placed the folded apron on the polished table before anyone else could answer. "I brought it into this hall. I lit the candle. I refused your order. That wasn't my question. It is the only answer that matters." Sophia took half a step forward, but Nia lifted one hand without looking back. The girl stopped. For the first time that evening, Vittorio's authority met something it could punish but could not force to bend. He studied the flour on Sophia's fingers, then the cook's pale knuckles, then Nia's steady face. "You would lose your livelihood for someone else's mistake." "It wasn't a mistake." Nia slid the estate's brass room key from her pocket and set it on top of the apron. Metal clicked against wood. And no one else should pay for my choice. The young footman finally raised his head. Mrs. Bellini's mouth tightened, but she did not intervene. Vittorio could have demanded the truth. He could have dismissed the cook and banished Sophia from the grounds. Instead, he made a smaller motion with his bandaged hand, sharp enough to end the matter. The kitchen staff remain. Sophia's mother pulled her daughter close as breath returned to the room. Nia had lost everything she possessed there, but she had kept the punishment from crossing the kitchen threshold. She collected her coat from the back of a chair. The wool was thin, still damp at the shoulders from that morning's rain. At the door, she paused and glanced toward the cake. Vittorio followed her gaze. "Extinguish it before you leave," he said. Nia opened the heavy oak door. Cold air swept inside, carrying wet earth and the iron smell of the storm. A house that fears joy is only a luxurious prison. Then she walked out without touching the candle. The door closed with a low, final boom. No one dared move toward the table. Vittorio remained beneath the chandelier, surrounded by marble, silver, and servants who obeyed him, while the tiny flame reflected in his dark eyes. For the first time in 9 years, someone had accepted his punishment, and left him alone with the thing he could not command himself to destroy. The candle kept burning. So did the question Nia had placed inside him: if this house was a prison, why was he still choosing to be its most obedient inmate? Rain traced crooked veins down the nursery windows, and thunder pressed against the estate like a fist that had forgotten how to knock. Long after the servants withdrew, Vittorio stood before the locked door upstairs, the forbidden candle trembling in the brass holder beside him. Its flame warmed one side of the key between his fingers, the other remained cold. For 9 years, he had carried that key without using it. Tonight, Nia's words had made it heavier than any weapon. The lock resisted with a dry metallic scrape. Then the door opened. Stale air drifted into the corridor, carrying dust, lavender, and the faint sweetness of a room preserved beyond reason. Vittorio stepped across the threshold alone. Moonlight touched a child-sized bed, a row of storybooks, and yellow stars painted across the ceiling. Nothing had been moved. A pink cardigan still hung from the bedpost. One tiny shoe waited beneath a wooden chair as if its owner might return for it before morning. Vittorio's polished shoes sank into the pale carpet. The floor gave a soft creak, and his hand went instinctively to the silver locket inside his coat. Near the toy chest sat a paper bag filled with old photographs and drawings, the memories he gathered each year on this night, carried to the fireplace, and burned before dawn. Destruction had been his ritual. Punishment had been easier when it left ashes. He opened the toy chest. A red felt dragon lay on top, its crooked button eyes staring upward. Vittorio lifted the hand puppet, and one loose thread brushed his knuckles. Beneath it rested a small camcorder labeled in a child's uneven handwriting, "For Papa, when he forgets." The battery was dead, but a charging cable remained wrapped around it. Minutes later, the camcorder flickered to life on the nursery desk. Static hissed through its tiny speaker. Then the screen filled with his daughter's face. She could not have been more than 6. The red dragon bounced over her hand while she whispered with theatrical seriousness, "Papa says Valenti men do not giggle." The puppet turned toward the camera. "Then Papa is doing it wrong." A younger Vittorio appeared at the edge of the recording, stern even in shirt sleeves. The child made the dragon sneeze, tumble backward, and accused the carpet of betrayal. His mouth twitched. She gasped triumphantly and chased him with the puppet as the image shook with her laughter. The recording ended on a sound Vittorio had treated as evidence against himself for 9 years, his own laugh, brief and unguarded, tangled with hers. The camcorder clicked into silence. Vittorio remained bent over the desk, one palm pressed against its cool wood. His shoulders moved once. No sound followed. Downstairs, Mrs. Bellini heard the nursery door standing open and stopped at the foot of the staircase. Vittorio descended carrying the puppet, the camcorder, and the unlit bag of memories. "Prepare the car," he said. The roads are flooding, sir. Then prepare it faster. At the front door, he paused beside the candle Nia had left behind. Its wick was short now, drowning in melted wax, but the flame still lived. Vittorio shielded it with one hand, carried it away from the draft, and set it safely beneath the portrait in the hall. He did not extinguish it. Moments later, the black sedan cut through sheets of rain, its headlights carving two pale tunnels into the night. Vittorio drove without a bodyguard, without an umbrella, without certainty that Nia would open her door. The red dragon rested on the passenger seat. For the first time in 9 years, he was not fleeing a memory. He was carrying it toward the only woman who had dared to tell him what his silence had become. And before dawn, Vittorio Valenti intended to ask Nia Carter to return, even if doing so required him to kneel before the person he had cast into the rain. Cold water hissed beneath the sedan's tires as the flooded street narrowed into a row of brick apartment buildings. A broken street lamp flickered over the curb, staining the rain a sickly amber. Vittorio stopped outside the address Mrs. Bellini had written for him, then crossed the sidewalk without an umbrella, carrying the red dragon puppet beneath his coat. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, water dripped from his sleeves and pooled around his polished shoes. Nia opened the door only as far as the security chain allowed. She had changed into a gray sweatshirt, and the skin around her eyes looked raw with exhaustion. Behind her, a radiator clanked in a room smelling of coffee and damp wool. Her gaze moved from Vittorio's soaked collar to the puppet under his arm. "You found the room," she said. "I opened it." "That isn't the same thing." The words landed softly, but Vittorio absorbed them without retreating. He removed the puppet and held it where she could see its crooked felt teeth. "My daughter used this to make me laugh." Nia's fingers tightened around the edge of the door. For one suspended moment, thunder rolled between them. "I came to ask you to return." "As your maid?" "On your terms." A humorless breath escaped her. "Men like you always say that when they expect gratitude." Vittorio reached into his coat, but Nia's shoulders stiffened. He stopped, slowly withdrew a folded document, and placed it on the hallway floor rather than forcing it into her hands. Rainwater spread through the paper's lower corner. "A written contract," he said. "Double wages. Private housing off the estate. No rule concerning celebrations. Authority to challenge any household order you believe causes harm. And no retaliation against Sophia or her mother." Nia looked down but did not unfasten the chain. "You think better pay turns humiliation into respect?" "No," his voice lost the steel that made armed men lower their eyes. "I think it proves I cannot dismiss you on a whim and call the damage discipline." Somewhere below, a door opened. Footsteps climbed the stairwell. 2 men in dark coats appeared at the landing, then froze when they recognized the most feared man in the city standing drenched outside a maid's apartment. Vittorio could have silenced them with a glance. Instead, he stepped back into the buzzing fluorescent light, where they could see everything. He set the red dragon on the floor. Then Vittorio Valenti lowered himself onto one knee. The concrete pressed dark water through his trousers. One of the men drew a sharp breath. By morning, every rival, associate, and soldier in his organization would hear that their boss had knelt in a public hallway before a woman he had fired. His authority had always depended on the belief that he bent for no one. Now he offered that belief as payment. "I punished you for bringing warmth into my home," he said. "I made you carry the cost of my grief. I was wrong." Nia closed the door. The chain scraped free. When it opened again, she stood before him without fear, but she did not offer her hand. "Stand up. An apology is not obedience, and I don't need either." Vittorio rose, leaving the contract between them. "Then tell me what you need." Nia picked up the wet document, tore it cleanly through the middle, and placed both halves against his chest. "Tomorrow night, you will gather every member of your household in that great hall. You will restore my position in front of the same people who watched you take it away. Sophia will light her mother's birthday candle. And you will tell them the ban was yours, the cruelty was yours, and the shame is yours. The watching men shifted, their coats whispering against the plaster wall. Vittorio's reputation could survive kneeling where strangers saw him. A public confession inside his own estate would strip away the fear on which his rule rested. Nia met his eyes, steady and unsparing. "If you want me back, open the doors before I cross them." She stepped inside, leaving Vittorio with the torn contract, the red dragon at his feet, and a demand no one in his world had ever dared make. By dawn, the storm had thinned to a cold drizzle, and water tapped against the Valenti estate's black windows like impatient fingers. The candle in the great hall was still burning, its flame reflected in the polished mahogany table, when Vittorio returned with the torn contract and the red dragon puppet. Mrs. Bellini stood beneath the chandelier, staring past him toward the open nursery door. "The staff have always believed your daughter died in that room," she said. Vittorio laid the puppet beside the candle. "She didn't." The housekeeper's keys stopped chiming. 9 years earlier, Vittorio's wife had tried to leave the estate with their daughter after learning how deeply his criminal world had entered their home. Vittorio had ordered the gates locked, not to harm them, he had told himself, but to keep his family where he could protect it. During the argument, his daughter slipped away, climbed into a waiting car with her mother, and was killed when the driver lost control on a rain-soaked road. His wife survived long enough to tell him that love without freedom was only fear wearing a finer coat. Afterward, Vittorio sealed the nursery, prohibited birthdays, and erased laughter from the estate because his daughter's final recording preserved him doing the one thing he could no longer forgive, laughing hours before his command destroyed their future. Mrs. Bellini's face tightened beneath the amber light. "You let everyone mourn around a lie." "No," Vittorio said, his voice scraping the silence. "I made them live inside my sentence." He crossed to the brass bell cord and pulled it. The bell's iron note rolled through the corridors, opening doors that had remained closed whenever grief entered the room. Footsteps gathered on the marble stairs. The young footman arrived first, then the other servants, their shoes whispering over the floor as they formed a cautious line. Vittorio did not wait for Nia to force the confession from him. He placed his signet ring on the table, the symbol by which orders in that house became law, and told them everything. The locked gates. The wet road. His wife's last words. His punishment of every harmless celebration that followed. No one moved. The candlewick crackled, releasing the faint scent of warm wax. "Nia Carter did not bring cruelty into this house," Vittorio said. "She exposed mine." The young footman, who had watched Nia surrender her apron without pleading, lifted his eyes. Fear no longer pushed them down. That small movement cost Vittorio something money could not restore, the unquestioned obedience on which his authority had rested. He accepted it without reaching for the ring. Mrs. Bellini stepped forward and set her keys beside it. "Then tomorrow cannot be another performance." Vittorio looked toward the entrance, where gray morning pressed against the glass. Nia had demanded accountability before returning, but confession alone would not prove that he could choose joy when every witness was present. He picked up the red dragon, its faded felt rough against his palm. "Send a car for Nia," he said. "Invite Sophia and her mother into the great hall. Tonight, every door stays open." Mrs. Bellini did not take back her keys. "And when the candle is lit?" Vittorio's fingers closed around the puppet. The household waited for an order. What they received was an admission. "Then I will do the one thing I have spent 9 years believing I had no right to do." Warm candlelight moved across the marble floor, touching the open nursery door, the abandoned signet ring, and the folded white apron Mrs. Bellini had placed beside it. By evening, every member of the household stood in the great hall. No one lowered their eyes. Rain whispered against the tall windows, while the air carried beeswax, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of the small birthday cake waiting at the center of the table. Nia entered without her uniform. Sophia and her mother walked beside her, their wet coats darkened by the storm. Vittorio waited at the foot of the staircase with the red dragon puppet in one hand. His black suit remained immaculate, but without the ring, his bare hand looked strangely human. A servant approached Nia with a fresh apron. She stopped him before he could unfold it. "Not yet." Vittorio heard the boundary and accepted it with a nod. Your dismissal is revoked, he said before the household. Your lost wages will be restored. The order was unjust, and the fault was mine. Nia's gaze moved toward the open doors lining the corridor. And tomorrow? They remain open. When your grief becomes difficult, they remain open. The young footman raised his eyes. This time, Vittorio did not punish him for it. Instead, he stepped away from the head of the table, surrendering the place from which every celebration had once been forbidden. Nia took Sophia gently by the shoulder and guided her forward. The girl's shoes squeaked against the polished stone. Her mother covered her mouth when Sophia struck the match. Sulfur sharpened the sweet air. The flame trembled, caught the wick, and painted gold across faces accustomed to silence. Then Nia did what no employee, rival, or blood relative had dared attempt. She crossed the room, took the dragon puppet from Vittorio's hand, and slipped it over her own. A confession can open a door, she said, the red felt brushing her wrist. But it cannot teach a man how to walk through it. The dragon turned toward him. In a gravelly voice, Nia made it inspect his severe black suit. 9 years, and this is still the best the mighty Vittorio Valenti can do? You look like a funeral arguing with another funeral. A startled breath escaped the footman. Mrs. Bellini's keys gave a tiny metallic chime as her fingers tightened around the table's edge. Vittorio's jaw hardened. Nia did not retreat. The puppet leaned closer. Your daughter worked with better material. Silence pressed against the walls. That sentence could have ended her employment forever. Instead, Nia removed the new contract from her coat, the one she had written herself, and placed it beside the ring. Its terms barred punishment without cause and gave every household worker the right to leave freely. Sign it, she said. Not because you want me back. Because no one here should need courage to be treated like a person. Vittorio picked up the pen. By signing, he surrendered more than command over a maid, he surrendered the private law that had made his home an extension of his fear. Ink scratched across paper. Nia finally accepted the apron, but she did not put it on. She handed the dragon back to him. Now earn the sound you buried. Sophia's candle burned steadily between them. Vittorio lifted the puppet, facing a room that no longer obeyed him blindly. His mouth opened, but whether grief would release him, or close around him once more, remained suspended in the warm air. A soft rasp of felt broke the silence as the red dragon's jaw opened and closed in Vittorio's hand. Candle wax warmed the air with the faint sweetness of honey, while rain tapped against the tall windows like impatient fingers. Every servant watched, but no one lowered their eyes. Vittorio stared at the puppet, its crooked white teeth and fraying scarlet fabric preserved by the daughter who had once used it to chase laughter through these halls. His hand had ordered gates locked, doors sealed, birthdays forbidden. Now that same hand trembled inside something made for joy. Your dragon looks terrified, Nia said. The corner of her mouth lifted, but her gaze remained steady. He has spent 9 years working for a very difficult man. A breath passed through the room. Not laughter. Not yet. Vittorio raised the puppet and forced its snout toward his face. He says the maid is insubordinate. His voice came out rough, almost unrecognizable without command in it. Nia folded the unsigned apron over one arm. Tell him the maid has a contract now. The dragon looked down at the document beside the abandoned signet ring. Vittorio made it recoil. He says he should have read the fine print. Mrs. Bellini's keys chimed softly as her shoulders moved. The young footman pressed his lips together, failing to hide a grin. Vittorio heard it, and the old instinct tightened his jaw, the reflex that had frozen this house whenever warmth threatened to enter. No one apologized. No one fled. The signed contract remained beneath his palm, proof that fear no longer belonged to him as a privilege. Then Sophia's mother cut the birthday cake. The knife whispered through icing, releasing the scent of vanilla and orange peel. Sophia carried the first slice toward Vittorio, but stopped several feet away. Only if the dragon asks nicely. Vittorio could have commanded the distance closed. Instead, he crossed it. Each footstep sounded against the marble. He lowered himself until the puppet was level with Sophia's eyes, then made the dragon bow so deeply that its soft nose touched the floor. "Please," he said through its crooked mouth. Sophia handed over the plate. A streak of frosting landed on the dragon's snout. Vittorio looked at it. Nia looked at him. 9 years of terror, she murmured, defeated by buttercream. The sound escaped before he could judge it. It began as a cracked breath, raw from disuse, then rose into a deep, startled laugh that shook his shoulders and bent him forward. The dragon flopped helplessly from his hand. Vittorio covered his mouth, but another laugh came through his fingers, uneven, painful, alive. Tears caught the chandelier light along his cheeks. No one mistook them for weakness. Mrs. Bellini laughed next. The young footman followed, then Sophia and her mother, until the great hall rang with the very sound it had been built to fear. Nia did not rescue Vittorio from the moment. She simply stood beside him while he chose to remain inside it. When the laughter quieted, he placed the puppet gently in her hands. "You did what no one else dared." Nia returned it to his chest. "No. I opened the door. You walked through." Vittorio turned toward the household and invited them to the table, not as property beneath his authority, but as people free to accept or refuse. Chairs scraped across marble. The young footman relit the candles. Mrs. Bellini reclaimed her keys. Nia finally tied on her apron, not as a mark of submission, but as a position protected by terms even Vittorio could not break. And when Sophia smeared another touch of frosting across the dragon's face, Vittorio laughed again, this time not because grief had released him, but because humility had taught him how to live with it.